Our adventure begins with Jinwoo, the main character who, on the surface, appears to be an ordinary person. He's an E-ranked hunter, the lowest rank among hunters. While he possesses extraordinary abilities compared to a regular human, among other hunters, he's considered to be a liability and is often called trash. He's a risk to everyone's life, and no one wants to be stuck with him in a dangerous situation. Despite all this, Jinwoo shows up every day for a job so dangerous that only hunters can do it. Every day he risks his life and faces countless near-death experiences, yet he persists. You might wonder why he would take such a risky job. Well, Jinwoo's mother is sick and needs medical care that he can't afford. The only way to make money to pay for her treatment is by taking on dangerous jobs through the Hunters Guild. Jinwoo arrives at the construction site, ready to put in a hard day's work. He's the most popular hunter on the site, not because he's the strongest or the hero, but because his presence makes everyone feel safer. If Jinwoo is there, the job is deemed easy enough that even the weakest can participate, and everyone can come back home safe. Despite the mocking from his fellow hunters, Jinwoo remains focused on his work. He's greeted by Juhee, a pretty and caring healer who's concerned about the bruises on his face. He explains that on his last job, the organizers decided to go cheap and skip having a healer, so he got a little bruised up. Juhee fusses over him, but the organizers announce that it's time to start the job. And what's the job, you ask? Dungeon hunting. Through gates that appear randomly around the city of Seoul, South Korea, Jinwoo steps into a new adventure where his life will once again be on the line. As expected, Jinwoo had pushed himself to the limit in the D-rank dungeon and suffered injuries. But isn't that what makes him different from the rest, the fact that he never gives up, despite being the weakest hunter? While Juhee tended to his wounds, she couldn't help but question why he takes such risks. Jinwoo, feeling like a burden, apologized for his actions, but Juhee was merely curious and reassured him that the raid would soon be over. Meanwhile, the high-ranked hunters were congratulating themselves on the success of the mission, having an easy time cleaning up the remaining monsters. However, Juhee refused to give up and continued to ask Jinwoo why he pushes himself so hard. "Why don't you quit being a hunter?" she inquired. "I'm just a hunter for fun. If I don't do this, I might actually die from boredom," replied Jinwoo with a laugh. But Juhee wasn't satisfied with this answer and threw some sass his way, causing him to injure himself further while laughing. After the raid, the hunters collected the spoils, magical cores that were worth thousands for C-ranked monsters. But despite risking his life, Jinwoo received an E-ranked core, earning very little money. Frustrated with his situation, he exclaimed, "Earning money like this sucks, but it's the best I can do." Suddenly, someone discovered another entrance, and the raid leader explained that there must be another boss deeper inside. However, going back for reinforcements would mean losing all the profits. The leader encouraged everyone to go forward themselves but warned them of the danger and asked them to take a vote. In the end, the vote was an 8-8 split, with Jinwoo being the tiebreaker. Feeling the pressure, Jinwoo shouted, "I'm going! I don't have enough money, and soon I will need to send my little sister to college. My mother needs her treatments. I have to do this for my family." And with that, the hunters geared up for another fight. "Are we going too far in? How long have we been walking?" Jinwoo asked, panting slightly. "About 40 minutes, replied the leader. "We only have an hour to leave the dungeon after the boss is killed, so we need to keep moving. We have about 20 more minutes of walking to go." Jinwoo turned to Juhee and apologized for forcing her to come alone. She had been one of the votes to turn back, but he had convinced her to press on. "I'm fine, Jinwoo," Juhee said. "You don't need to worry about me." "Are you really okay?" Jinwoo asked, concerned. "To be honest, no, I'm definitely not okay," Juhee admitted, flipping out and giving Jinwoo a piece of her mind. She had just barely saved his life up above, and he continued to want to push deep into the dungeon. I'm sorry, Jinwoo said, trying to placate her. Are you really sorry? Juhi retorted. If you're that sorry, how about you take me out on a date? Huh? Jinwoo stammered, caught off guard. What, you don't like eating with me? Juhi teased. No, of course not. That's not it, Jinwoo replied, chuckling nervously. At that moment, the group reached the boss room, and everyone fell silent. No one had ever seen a door this big before in a dungeon. It was strange and unsettling. This place could be very dangerous. What do you want to go back without earning any loot? The leader asked. Anyone who wants to go back can go, but I'm going in, he declared, and the other hunters followed his lead. As they pushed through, the lights in the dungeon came to life, illuminating the eerie statues that lined the walls. Okay, everyone, you know what to do. Scout the dungeon out. I don't believe anyone's been here in a while, the leader instructed. Jinwoo was amazed at the sight of the statues, all of them holding different weapons, even an instrument. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, and he suspected that the giant statue at the back of the room might be the boss. As they searched, the hunters found something that looked like a magic seal and a giant tablet with runic text. The leader could read some of the words. First, worship the Lord. Second, praise the Lord. Third, prove your faith. Suddenly, the statues began to move, and Jinwoo felt a strange energy emanating from them. The room became so quiet that the air grew chilly, and the leader continued to read the commandments. Those who do not follow these commandments will never leave alive, he read ominously, and with that, the door slammed shut. The hunters began to panic as the giant statue came to life, splattering the walls with crimson. One hunter tried to leave, but the statue quickly dispatched him, leaving behind a statue covered in liquid crimson. Jinwoo's gaze was drawn to the giant statue's eyes, and he felt a presence that he couldn't quite explain. The group was in for a fight, and Jinwoo wasn't sure they were ready for what was to come. Wow, that was intense, Jinwoo said to himself, catching his breath. No way we had to fight those. That guy was barely D-ranked. Is this dungeon higher than D-rank? His mind was racing with the realization of the danger they were in. Does that mean that the giant statue is the boss? We're all going to die here. And to think, I'm only an E-ranked hunter. What are my chances of survival? But he couldn't let fear paralyze him. He had faced danger before and had come out alive. No, I'll be fine, he said, his voice laced with determination. This isn't the first time I've encountered something like this. In my first raid, I accidentally broke away from my party and got lost. A monster got me in the back, and I was in the hospital for a week. And then there was that time I was trapped in a dungeon and almost starved to death. Even though they were low-ranked dungeons, my life was on the line. Other hunters trade their cores for magical weapons and armor, but not me. I have other responsibilities. They all look down on me, call me the weakest, and my clothes are destroyed in all of the dungeons. But I ignored them and kept pushing. No, I won't die here. As he looked around at the other hunters, Jinwoo felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. They were all relying on him, even though he was the weakest among them. And then, in a split second, he knew they were all in danger. Everyone duck! He screamed out, and beams flew from the eyes of the giant statue. More than a few of the hunters died, and even the leader only barely survived. The healer, Ju-hee, was instantly traumatized, which explained why such a high-level healer was with a low-ranked group. She wasn't mentally able to handle the trauma. The leader asked Jinwoo, "Why did you yell, 'Everyone drop'? Did you know what was going to happen?" Jinwoo said, "No, I only felt there was danger." And then he realized that the leader's arm was half gone. While they helped him bandage his arm, they asked him, "Sir, what rank does that look to you?" He said, "I've only seen up to B rank, and this has to surpass that. That boss has to be S rank." The temple recited its commandments out loud. First, worship the Lord. Second, praise the Lord. Third, prove your faith. Those who do not follow these commandments will never leave alive. Jinwoo explained to the leader that he felt that they only needed to kill the boss. It was their only chance of getting out of there alive. The leader nodded, knowing that Jinwoo's instincts had saved them once already. With a renewed sense of purpose, they continued on, knowing that they were in for the fight of their lives. The gates. It was a mysterious tunnel that linked our world to another. A decade ago, after the first gate emerged, our world witnessed countless strange events. The first was the appearance of hunters, individuals who gained an extraordinary level of power that remained constant after their transformation. I, too, became a hunter, but my strength only reached an E rank. Despite being stronger than most humans, the gap between me and higher ranks was immense. Hunters were those who possessed this unique power and ventured into the gates to fight off monstrous creatures. But it came at a great risk. Sometimes, upon entering the gate, one would encounter insane and ominous monsters that induced despair. Jinwoo noticed the leader's bleeding that showed no sign of stopping. "Are you going to be all right?" he asked. "There's nothing we can do about it. I only brought 3 healers because I thought this would be an easy raid," the leader replied. One healer had been attacked so brutally that not even a trace of their corpse remained. Another was in shock, lying over there. Even Ju-hee, a seasoned hunter, had never encountered anything like this. The hunters were in shock, and in that state, they were useless. But not Jinwoo. He was ready. Suddenly, a hunter decided to make a break for it. "I finally joined a big guild. I can't die here," he muttered to himself. The leader shouted for him to stop, but he was confident in his speed. "Yeah, I can make it," he thought. On his third step, he was vaporized by the statue's eyes. The other hunters turned away, unable to bear the sight. Jinwoo pondered why the statues didn't kill them all. There had to be more to this. The guard statue attacked only when they approached the door, while the boss statue shot beams only when they moved. Yes, there were rules to this room. "The commandments," Jinwoo muttered. Jinwoo asked the leader what the first commandment was. "To worship the Lord," the leader replied. "I believe the commandments are the rules to this dungeon," Jinwoo said. At that moment, he started to move, and the leader thought he was trying to kill himself. But then, he noticed Jinwoo's eyes. "Those aren't the eyes of someone seeking death," he thought. "He doesn't attack those who move," Jinwoo declared. Jinwoo struggled to raise his body off the ground, his eyes fixed on the Lord. He knew that the slightest movement beyond a certain height would trigger an attack. Finally, it dawned on him the true meaning of the first commandment. "I get it now," he exclaimed. "Everyone, bow down to the statue." The others were hesitant, protesting Jinwoo's sudden outburst. "Have you lost your mind?" Sung Jinwoo's comrades asked, incredulous. But the leader had faith in him. "Jinwoo must have a plan," he said, backing him up. Jin Woo explained that the Lord's attack would only be triggered if they failed to bow down low enough. To worship the Lord meant to literally bow down and worship Him. You heard him, Jin Woo urged. Everyone, bow down. What other choice do we have? We get to live, and we can finally get out of here. Just by bowing. As everyone bowed, the statue's eyes dimmed, then went out. The Lord's face twisted into a monstrous smile, and Jin Woo noticed that his expression had changed. How many of us has he killed? He thought to himself. How many are still alive? He didn't believe that it was over just yet. Suddenly, the Lord stood up, and everyone followed suit. Wait, it's not over yet, Jin Woo exclaimed. Don't tell me we have to face him. Don't you have any other plans? He asked, turning to his comrades. Despite their desperation, they were at a loss. Even if you asked me that, I don't know what to do either, Jin Woo admitted. Then, he remembered the commandments. The first was to worship the Lord, he said. The second is to praise the Lord. That has to be the key. Jin Woo's eyes lit up with a newfound hope. Praise, he whispered. If it's praise, then one of us has to step up and do the praising. Suddenly, a hunter spoke up. He was a member of the church choir, and began to sing a hymn of praise. Make me new and pour your graces, he sang. The weakness found within me, all will wash away. From the love of the Lord your love holds on to me. Jin Woo watched in horror as the hunter praised the wrong god, and the Lord responded by squishing him, spreading crimson across the floor. We have to find a way to stop him, Jin Woo urged, his mind racing with ideas. There has to be a way out of this. As Jin Woo and the other hunters struggled for their lives against the Lord's deadly onslaught, fear and panic consumed them. With each passing moment, they could feel the hunter's grip on them tightening, and they knew that their chances of survival were dwindling rapidly. The Lord's power was overwhelming, and the hunters could only watch in horror as he crushed their comrades beneath his feet. Jin Woo refused to leave Ju He behind, even as the leader ordered them to separate. He knew he had to act fast if they were to stand any chance of survival. Meanwhile, one of the hunters had flashbacks to the reason why he had come out of retirement to return to hunting. He hid under a small statue, hoping to avoid the Lord's wrath. But it was too late for him. He was split in half, and the statue continued to repeat the same eerie chant. Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! Jin Woo's attention was drawn to the statues with instruments, wondering if they could be used as safe zones. He shouted for the other hunters to move towards the instruments, hoping to find some way to outsmart the Lord's deadly attacks. As they made their way towards the statues, Jin Woo realized that each statue had a different commandment. When the first hunter standing before a musician's statue triggered it to play, Jin Woo knew that this was the second commandment. But when he tried to trigger the statue with Ju He, it refused to play. Could it be that only one person could use each statue? Jin Woo urged the others to stay put and stay safe. But as he sprinted towards a new statue, the Lord noticed him and brought his foot down with a thunderous crash. Jin Woo narrowly avoided being crushed, but in his haste, he chose the wrong direction and came to a stop in front of another statue. The Lord's shield came down, taking Jin Woo's leg with it. He crawled towards life and prayed that he would survive. I was holding on to a thread that kept me from dying. But even now, it feels like even that may break, he thought to himself as he heard the eerie chant of the statue. Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! In the end, he had made it, but at what cost? Ju He raced to Jin Woo's side, her heart pounding in her chest at the sight of his battered body. She wasted no time in calling upon her healing powers, but as she worked, a sudden surge of energy overwhelmed her. Crimson spurted from her nose, a sign that she had reached her limit. The hunters had started their mission with a team of 17, but now only 6 remained, 2 of whom were gravely injured. Amidst the chaos and fear, one of the hunters decided to point fingers, accusing the leader of neglect and failure. But before anyone could respond, a sudden commotion drew their attention. With a deafening crash, an altar descended from the ceiling, a sight that sent shivers down their spines. It was clear that someone would have to be sacrificed upon that ominous structure, the ultimate test of faith. The finger pointer drew his sword and turned to the leader, demanding that he step forward to take responsibility. But Jin Woo, his voice ringing with conviction, refused to let his friend bear the blame. As they approached the altar, flames burst into life, casting eerie shadows across the dungeon. 3 more lights flickered to life, illuminating the chamber with an otherworldly glow. Jin Woo's mind raced with the realization that they were in a race against time. The gate would open completely after 7 days, allowing the monsters to pour through and ravage their world. With determination in his eyes, Jin Woo rallied the remaining hunters to join him on the altar. As soon as they stepped onto the platform, the dungeon erupted in a dazzling display of blue light, encircling them with flames. The doors creaked open, revealing smaller statues that began to move, signaling the start of their trial. Jin Woo's heart was pounding as he warned Miss Juhi. "You can't close your eyes. It's just like the game we played when we were young. They'll come closer when you take your eyes off them." His voice echoed in the chamber, and he hoped everyone was listening. Suddenly, the female hunter rebelled, exclaiming, "F that!" before sprinting towards the door. To everyone's amazement, she made it out alive, and as she did, the door closed a little. The blue flames flickered in the dim light, slowly fading with the passage of time. One red flame disappeared when the hunter left, and Jin Woo knew what that meant. "When all the red flames are gone, the door will close completely," he warned the others. "Don't move! We can't afford to lose any more people. If we do, we won't have enough to stop the approaching statues." The group looked at Jin Woo, their leader, expecting him to come up with a solution. "All we have to do is stay and look at the statues until the blue flame disappears," he said calmly. "The blue flames are the timers. We'll all be able to leave if we achieve this." The leader looked doubtful. "But couldn't the doors just close completely when the time runs out?" he asked. The finger pointer felt a pang of regret. He had always looked down on Jin Woo, never expecting anything from him, even when he joined their party. But a lot of people had died in that room, and the ones who were still alive were there because of him. "You may be right," he said. "But don't leave. We need you." With that, the finger pointer made a dash forward, and Jin Woo couldn't help but admire his bravery. "You can't hate him too much," he thought. "He has a family just like the rest of us." Jin Woo shouted, "If you leave, you doom us all." He knew he had to keep the group together if they were going to survive. And he was determined to make sure that everyone made it out alive. The leader's voice echoed through the chamber as the doors threatened to close. It was too late for them to escape, but he finally understood what was happening. "You all need to leave now," he said, his voice urgent. "The doors will stay open as long as I remain here. You're young, you still have a chance at life. Juhi, you're going to help Jin Woo walk out of here." Juhi rose to her feet, but her legs gave out from under her. "Looks like you've used up too much mana," Jin Woo observed. The situation was dire, and the only way to escape was if the leader carried Juhi out. "I promised to buy you dinner," Jin Woo said, trying to lighten the mood. But the leader wasn't in the mood for jokes. He knocked Juhi unconscious. "Please take care of her," Jin Woo said, his voice grave. Jin Woo watched his companions walk through the door before it sealed shut behind them. The statues came to life, stabbing him repeatedly. "I don't want to die," he screamed, his mind racing with memories of past betrayals. "I have a family too." As Jin Woo lay in a puddle of crimson, a system screen popped before his eyes. "You have completed all the necessary requirements of the secret quest. Courage of the Weak," it read. "What's this?" Jin Woo wondered, confused. A secret quest completed all the requirements? Wait, where is the sound even coming from? The screen gave him an option. "You have earned the right to become a player. Will you accept? You do not have much time remaining. If you refuse, your heart will stop approximately 2 seconds after. Will you accept?" Jin Woo had a split second to make a decision. It was a chance at life, but was it worth it? He thought it over and decided to take the risk. "I accept," he said firmly. As soon as the words left his mouth, blinding golden light filled the chamber, enveloping him in its warmth. Jin-Woo felt a surge of energy flow through his body. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it as a player. Jin-Woo's eyes shot open as he jolted upright, feeling phantom pains in his chest. Was it all just a dream? He looked around and realized he was in a place he knew all too well, the hospital. Just then, 2 men dressed in black entered his room, startling him. "I'm sorry if we surprised you, Mr. Woo. Here's my card," one of them said, handing him a card. "The Korean Hunters Guild Inspectors Division." Jin-Woo couldn't help but wonder what the inspectors wanted from him. "Did the other hunters make it out safe?" he asked, relieved to hear they were fine, except for Hunter Ju, he who needed time to recover from her extreme trauma. "When we arrived in the dungeon, we found your body lying upon an altar. All the statues in the room were gone. If we hadn't found some of the body parts of the deceased, we would have believed there was a different explanation for the event," the inspector explained, leaving Jin-Woo perplexed. "We believe you have received the double awakening," the inspector continued, his tone serious. "We're going to test your powers. Please place your hand upon the stone in the machine." The stone indicated a mana level of 10, the lowest E rank being at least 70. After the test was over, the inspector division packed up and left. Jin-Woo couldn't help but feel a bit disheartened by the results of the test. "I guess I'm the weakest," he muttered to himself. But he couldn't dwell on it for too long as his sister Gina arrived, attacking him for being the only one injured once again. Gina was an expert at video games, and Ji-Woo knew she could help him. "Gina, I need help. When there's an unread mail in a game, how would you read it?" Ji-Woo asked. "Well, you would have to open the mailbox first," she replied, a bit confused. Just then, a system screen popped up, notifying Jin-Woo of unread daily quests, and warning him of penalties if he failed to obey the system's orders. Jin-Woo didn't understand any of it, but he knew he had seen it before upon his deathbed, no less. The new quest wanted him to complete a bunch of exercise tasks, but he was in the hospital and didn't have time for that. "You will be penalized if you do not complete the quest," the screen warned him. Suddenly, an earthquake struck, and Jin-Woo found himself falling into a pit of sand, only to be transported to another world's eerie orange desert. A giant centipede immediately attacked him, and the system directed him to survive until the time ran out. He had 4 hours left. Jin-Woo started running for his life as the centipede chased him relentlessly. The clock was ticking, and he had to survive until time ran out. Eventually, the alarm went off, indicating that he had completed the penalty quest. As he lay on the hospital bed, exhausted and drained, the nurses gossiped about the miraculous recovery of the hunter. "He's been exercising and running every day," one of them said admiringly. "Look at him go." Despite his physical weakness, Jin-Woo had something that no one else did, a secret screen that only he could see. It was a reward system that gave him stats, skills, and items for completing various tasks. It was like a video game come to life, and he was being controlled by a mysterious phenomenon. Although the rewards from the system were mostly junk, like band-aids, pens, and paper clips, one day he received an E-class dungeon key. It was a dangerous item, but Jin-Woo felt confident in his ability to handle it, especially since he was now double awakened. However, when he entered the instant dungeon through a blue gate in the subway, he immediately realized that it was not a typical dungeon. It was similar to the notorious Red Dungeon, and Jin-Woo knew that he had to be cautious. He was alone, and the thought of facing danger solo was daunting. But he was determined to survive, no matter what. "Just a few days ago, I was the weakest," he thought to himself. "But now, I have to face this dungeon alone." As Jin-Woo entered the subway, he immediately noticed that something was off. The station was dilapidated, and a strong stench wafted through the air. Suddenly, a giant wolf with steel fangs appeared, ready to attack. Could he possibly defeat such a monstrous creature? He had always thought that he was tough enough to handle 1 or 2 goblins, but this was an entirely different level of danger. Jinwoo's legs trembled with fear, but he managed to gather his wits and quickly dodged the wolf's initial swipe. As the wolf's tail swept past him, Jinwoo realized just how light his body felt. He knew that he had to fight back to survive, and he took a swing at the wolf. With one powerful blow, the wolf was sent flying through the barricades. Jinwoo couldn't believe his eyes. Was this because of his improved strength stat? Unfortunately, the wolf quickly recovered and returned to the fight, proving to be far stronger than Jinwoo. He continued to run, dodge, and attack, but the wolf was unfazed. Feeling desperate and alone, Jinwoo suddenly thought of a weapon. His inventory popped up, revealing the sword left behind by the finger pointer. Without hesitation, he swung the sword at the red wolf, splitting its head in half. A ding signaled his level up. Jinwoo had no time to celebrate as 2 more wolves appeared. He knew it was time to fight. He quickly cut the first wolf in half, getting the sword stuck in its mouth. Compared to the statues he had faced, these wolves were mere trash. The sword added an additional 10 points to his attack, and thanks to leveling up, all his stats increased by 1. Completing his daily quest earned him 3 valuable stat points to allocate, but leveling up and battling monsters was much more efficient. He had no idea what each individual stat did, but the sword's strength enhancement was immediately noticeable. He could feel the power coursing through his veins, and with it, he knew he could become even stronger. After looting the corpses of fallen monsters, he only received 1 item, Riken's Farm. "Do you want to sell Riken's Farm for 20 gold?" his personal store asked. He hesitated before accepting the offer, thinking it probably wasn't worth much. Jinwoo then contemplated his situation. He knew he couldn't leave the dungeon until he defeated the boss or found the return stone. Maybe grinding some levels could help him accomplish this task, but it would be dangerous. Death was always a possibility, but for now, he needed to focus on the wolves. As a pack of wolves descended upon him, Jinwoo felt no fear. He had already died once before. He sprinted towards the monsters, slashing left and right, and when a wolf grabbed him from behind, he swung back in a circular motion. The fight continued fiercely, and one after the other, the wolves were dispatched, but they kept coming. Jinwoo leveled up again and again, but he couldn't stop to distribute his stats. He would be slaughtered. Rest was not an option either. He had a family to protect and couldn't continue being a weakling. "If I can become stronger, I'll follow even these BS rules," he thought, as he charged into the next round of wolves, slaughtering them as if they were nothing. With each ding of the leveling up alarm, Jinwoo became more confident in his abilities. Then, finally, he received a new title, Wolf Slayer. His blade had become dull from the unrelenting fighting. In an attempt to make things easier for himself, Jinwoo had once bought a cheap dagger which proved useful during his time in the dungeon. However, the dagger broke way too easily during the boss fight, even though it had increased his loot drops. Jinwoo couldn't make ends meet and never bought another weapon again. But thanks to this sword, everything worked out here. Jinwoo had earned the title of Wolf Slayer, given to hunters who were proficient in fighting wolves. It provided a 40% increase in experience against beast-type monsters. He checked his inventory, which included 34 wolf fangs, 2 worn daggers, traveler's clothes, and a hearthstone. Jinwoo decided to put the hearthstone back as he knew he only had 1 shot at this dungeon and was determined to take that chance. He went back to killing the small fry, and with every ding, he leveled up. He fought off panthers and monkeys as they continued to swarm him, but he felt it becoming easier with each passing moment. He could sense himself getting stronger, and because the monsters respawned repeatedly, fighting felt like a real video game to him. This allowed him to see the patterns of each attack and kill each monster in less time. The color of the monster's name changed according to its strength. White meant weak, orange meant strong, and red meant very strong. All the monsters had gone from orange to white, showing that his grinding had been successful. Even at his current level, Jinwoo sensed that the boss down below was dangerously strong, giving him goosebumps. Despite his best efforts, the weak monsters could not push his level past 15, and his sword was nearing its limit. Jinwoo had no choice but to push forward. The subway station below was like a damp jungle with rivers and streams. The moment Jinwoo took a step forward, a log-shaped object burst out of the water. As he dodged, a giant snake appeared before him. He used the sword to reflect the snake's head, but it shattered almost to the hilt. Instead of pressing the attack, the snake coiled up and examined Jinwoo, displaying its intelligence. But his name appeared in only orange, meaning Jinwoo had a chance. The boss had smooth blue scales covering its entire body, which were so tight that it was like armor. There was no way his broken sword would penetrate its hide. But as Jinwoo processed the situation, the giant snake continued its attack. Jinwoo backhanded his broken sword and readied himself for the next attack. "So, you're the boss of this place?" Jinwoo's voice was calm, but his heart raced with anticipation. The massive serpent before him had impenetrable scales and a defense that seemed impossible to breach. "My sword won't press those scales and punches will be ineffective also. I need a super fast attack with weight behind it. And I also need to weaken his defense. How will I get past these scales?" Jinwoo parried the boss's attacks with his sword, but he knew that one direct hit would spell his doom. He took a blow to his side and crumpled to the ground, gritting his teeth in frustration. He had trained hard, but his skills were still lacking. The weight of his reputation as the world's weakest hung heavy on his shoulders. He had come here to become stronger, to push past his limits and prove his worth. Jinwoo knew that pure strength alone was not enough. Fear could make even the strongest warrior falter. But as he stood up to face the boss once more, Jinwoo felt a new sense of determination wash over him. "Compared to that guy, compared to the fear from that time, I'm not scared at all," he whispered to himself. "I put all my points in strength. I'll squeeze this snake to death." With a burst of energy, Jinwoo leapt into the air and wrapped his arms around the boss's neck. He squeezed with all his might, his muscles bulging with effort. "Die, die!" he yelled, his voice echoing through the chamber. For a moment, it seemed as if the boss would never succumb. But then, with a final shudder, it collapsed to the ground. Jinwoo lay back against the serpent, panting with exertion. "Stronger?" he muttered to himself. "I guess I got a little stronger." The alarm rang, indicating that Jinwoo had successfully slain the feared ruler of the swamp, Blue Poison Fang's Rasaka. However, the victory came at a great cost. Jinwoo's clothes were in tatters, and the sword he had just received was now broken. Every inch of his body ached, but he didn't regret it. After all, he had obtained a valuable treasure, a dagger made from the Rasaka's deadly fangs. The attack power of the new weapon was more than twice that of his old dagger, and it even had the added bonus of paralysis and bleeding effects. Along with the dagger, he also received a bag filled with high-level poison, which he stored away for later use. With the boss defeated, the dungeon returned to its normal state, and Jinwoo exited the station, relieved that it was finally over. However, he was soon approached by a soldier who informed him of a broadcast he had missed. As a hunter, Jinwoo was guided by the soldier through the streets, which were now filled with destruction and the corpses of monsters. It was clear that a gate had opened nearby, and while the small monsters had been taken care of, the boss remained. Jinwoo could feel the boss's presence, possibly due to his high sense stat. He then spotted a group of hunters being attacked by a giant lightning golem. The tank was struggling to hold it off, and the healers were reaching their limit. Jinwoo knew that reinforcements were needed, but the golem had high defense, and they were lacking mages. Meanwhile, the soldiers were busy keeping the civilians safe amidst the chaos. Among the healers was Miss Ju Hee, who was still traumatized from a past encounter. Jin Woo could see that she was struggling, but he knew that he had to overcome his own fear to save everyone. With his broken blade, he launched a powerful strike from a distance, piercing the golem and taking it down in a single hit. The tank was amazed at the strength and destruction of the attack and looked around for the hunter responsible. However, Jin Woo had already retreated, leaving behind the lingering question of whether he was becoming a higher-level hunter. Ju Hee saw it all and couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and admiration for Jin Woo's bravery and power. Jin Woo was finally being discharged from the hospital today, and as he worked on his daily quests, he couldn't help but feel relieved that there were no more penalty quests for him. However, the daily quests were beginning to take a toll on his body, which was noticed by the nurses who were constantly pining for his phone number. Meanwhile, back at home, Jin Woo's sister was getting increasingly concerned about the drastic changes she was seeing in him. Jin Woo countered, "Stop making such a fuss and take an umbrella. It's going to rain today. Be safe on your way to school." Jin Woo pulled up his status window and was amazed at the changes he saw. There was no way a few weeks of exercise could have transformed him so much. It had to be all the points he had put into strength. However, he realized that putting all his points into strength wasn't wise, and decided to distribute them evenly. He also knew that intelligence was crucial, even if he had no magic, and resolved to keep that stat up as well. Just then, Jin Woo received a phone call from his landlord. His rent was past due, and it was time for him to get back to work. Now that he was becoming stronger, he should be able to make money more easily as a hunter. However, progressing forward was going to be difficult. In order to kill higher-level monsters, he needed to enter higher-level gates, but he wasn't ready to be reevaluated just yet. He would need to find another way. Jin Woo realized that he needed to become much stronger first. Once he gained levels, he knew that malicious eyes would be upon him, which would be dangerous for both him and his family. He joined a personal attack force to recruit more manpower and fill their ranks. Upon arriving at the site of the gate, Jin Woo was greeted by the leader and other members who mocked him for being the world's weakest hunter. The leader put a stop to their teasing and explained that they needed more people to enter the dungeon. Jin Woo was going to be paid a handsome sum of 2 million won just for showing up and filling out the ranks. He was handed the contract for the job. "I'm Eugene Ho," said a fellow recruit who was also there under similar circumstances. "I'm 22 and AD rank hunter." Jin Woo was taken aback by Jin Ho's shiny armor and asked him if he was the son of a millionaire. The leader led Jin Woo to their equipment, which he would be in charge of carrying. It contained food, clothes, and first aid kits. Personal attack forces had a hard time attracting healers, so this was the way they always did raids. The group delved deeper into the dungeon, but to their surprise, there were no monsters in sight. "Is it even possible to have a dungeon with no monsters?" Jin Ho's voice echoed through the eerie silence. Jin Woo silenced him with a raised hand, his senses on high alert. "It's not that there are none. They just haven't shown themselves yet. These monsters must possess high intellect," he replied. Suddenly, a loud screech pierced the silence, and Jin Woo's eyes widened in alarm. "Insect-type monsters!" he screamed, as a swarm of ants poured out from the tunnel above them. The tank sprang into action, using Provoke to control the flow of ants, while the damage dealers worked together to dismantle them. As they fought, Jin Woo couldn't help but notice how well the team worked together, especially considering they were raiding the dungeon without any healers. Despite his best efforts, he grew increasingly frustrated, only able to take swipes at a few ants here and there without drawing attention from the others. But the scout's keen eye picked up on something unusual. Some of the ants had strange markings on their exoskeletons. "There must be an apex predator nearby," the scout warned. Jin Woo's instincts told him that the team was in for a tough battle. As they cautiously made their way deeper into the dungeon, Jin Woo picked up on a sense of unease among the group. He sensed a killing intent emanating from his companions, and he knew they were all in danger. Jin-ho, your sword and shield are expensive, right? Jin Woo asked, his voice low. Yes, my father took extra care after hearing that I was going on my first raid, Jin-ho replied, a hint of confusion etched on his face. I'm not sure, but you should be wary, Jin Woo warned, his eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of danger. Dungeons could vary in size, and it was hard to predict how long it would take to clear them. Some dungeons could be conquered in just a few hours, while others could take weeks to explore and analyze. Jin Woo's system had warned him about lizards, but he couldn't fathom why. However, he knew that his bad premonitions were usually accurate. The group spent a considerable amount of time searching the dungeon, but all they found were half-dead ants. The scout used his light to illuminate the current room, and a horrific sight awaited them. They had finally stumbled upon the boss room, and mana crystals covered every surface. It was like hitting the jackpot. Although mana crystals were worth less than monster cores, they made up for it in volume. There were tons of them. Jin-ho asked to inspect Jin Woo's contract, and he pointed out that there was nothing in it that prevented them from splitting the crystals with Jin Woo. However, the death glares he received from the other party members indicated otherwise. The main issue was that they had a limited amount of time to exit the dungeon once the boss was defeated. This meant that they needed to collect the crystals before the boss was killed. Fortunately, the boss was sound asleep after devouring all of his comrades. Jin Woo realized that the party setup of this group made no sense. It was mandatory to have 10 people to enter a dungeon, yet they only had 8. The group made the excuse that they had forgotten the mining equipment in the car. They used this as a perfect opportunity to barricade Jin Woo and Jin-ho inside the boss room. That was when the lizards revealed their true faces. Jin Woo had a flashback to one of his earlier dungeon dives. A helpful veteran gave him tips on how to stay safe in the dungeon. He warned Jin Woo about lizards. Sometimes there are lizard-like hunters. It's a pretty dangerous job. Accidents often happen inside dungeons. And even if a crime does occur, it's hard to prove, so they are commonplace as well. There is no CCTV or any other form of proof in a dungeon. The weaker you are, the faster you will be tossed to the side. If you are strong, they will seek out your strength. If you're so weak that you get in their way, just like a lizard leaving his tail, you'll get cut away. Jin Woo, you need to be careful when you enter dungeons. Do your best to stay alive. Jin Woo was cool, calm, and collected. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Jin-ho, on the other hand, was panicking. This was his first raid after all. Coming from a life of privilege, he couldn't understand why someone would do this over a handful of crystals. Jin Woo realized he was in a trap from pretty early in the raid. But if he had tried something, the losers were ready to strike them down. In their very first fight, he was told not to pay too much attention to small things. He realized then that this group was up to no good. Even though they did a really good job blocking off their exit, getting out wouldn't be that big of a problem. The real problem was the boss that was now awake because of the explosion. Jin Woo believed the mana crystals saved their lives. There was a high chance that the group would have just killed them upon reaching the boss room. But they needed to farm the crystals, giving Jin Woo an opportunity to survive. The lizards returned from their lunch break, hoping that the trap had taken care of the weaklings. If their trap hadn't worked, they would have to kill the boss themselves, which would force them to forfeit the crystals. But on the other hand, there was some really nice equipment on the D-ranked hunter Jin-ho. Well, that all depended on how prominent his rich family was. None of the lizards had much confidence that they would be able to solo the boss. After all, a boss was a boss. So, a first-time D-ranked hunter shouldn't have the ability to kill it. Especially with the dead weight known as the world's weakest, pulling him down. Jin-ho was prepared to protect Jin Woo, even if it cost him his life. "I'll think of something," he said. even though he was afraid of the boss's many eyes, its hideous mouth and enormous size. Jin Ho felt that the boss's strength was on another level. Jin Woo scoffed at this. He had seen another level. That's idiotic nonsense. Jin Ho, stay there. The boss is mine. Jin Woo's new dagger sparked with anticipation. The battle was about to begin. Jin Woo approached the boss unfazed by the protests of Jin Ho. And in order to solo such a boss, you needed to be a B rank, or at least an elite in the rank of C. Jin Woo understood that he was still weak. But as he stood in front of the boss, he felt no fear. And that was enough for him to give this his all. To give you perspective, the blue poison Fang Rasaka was possibly at the level of E rank, and the golem was a D rank or lower. In comparison to them, this boss was unbelievably strong. Jin Woo felt he was strong enough that he was not intimidated by the C-ranked boss. He yelled out, "My current level is 18. A C-ranked boss is doable." Jin Woo began the battle with an aerial assault. His opening attack worked. The Rasaka's Fang is a pretty good weapon, isn't it? He said to himself. This is the reason a hunter is called a hunter. The real hunt begins now. Jin Ho was in shock. This couldn't be an E-ranked hunter. Jin Woo's speed increased as the battle continued. His weapon caused sparks as it chipped away at the spider. Its skin is pretty thick. If I want to damage it with the dagger, I'll have to dig in as deep as possible. Jin Woo dashed away from an attack that punched through the floor. Having so many eyes meant the boss had 0 blind spots. Jin Woo did his best to get close to the boss. Is this person really an E-rank hunter? No, there is no way. But he definitely was registered as an E-rank with the Korean Hunters Association. I can barely keep track of him with my eyes. Is he really a false ranker? Among hunters, there are sometimes those who can control the presence of their magical power. If such a hunter did this on purpose to get a lower rank, they are usually called false rankers. Jin Woo just can't be a psychopath that kills for pleasure. I can't track him. His speed is increasing. Father, why did I say I'd come to this place? Jin Woo had been fighting the boss for over 10 minutes. If he continued at this pace, he'd run out of stamina. As Jin Woo's fatigue climbed higher, his speed decreased. He wouldn't be able to keep this up for much longer. It was time for him to finish this. I'll have to inflict the dagger's passive effects of poison and bleed on its weak spots. And at that moment the boss sprayed acid across the floor. Jin Woo's time was running out as he closed the distance. A new ability popped up: Sprint. Your movement will increase by 30%. An instant after he activated his new ability, he scored the first hit on its eyes. But the enemy's resistance was too high, the effect of paralysis was cancelled. Jin Woo pushed harder, moving even faster. As his fatigue continued to rise and his stamina dropped, his time was running out. As he jumped towards the boss to deal the final blow, he was hit so hard he crashed into the floor. And as he lay broken on the floor, he accepted his unused daily quest reward: stasis recovery. Being fully recovered, he had a second chance to finish this. And in an instant, he dug his dagger into the boss's eyes. Effect Paralyze has activated. Effect Bleed has activated. Effect Paralyze has activated. Jin Woo dug his dagger in over and over, stacking the effects. The spider couldn't withstand the onslaught. The dungeon boss has been slain. If it wasn't for his daily quest reward, he might have been in real trouble. Jin Ho decided his best chance at survival was to be as useful as possible, in hopes that Jin Woo would spare his life. He passed Jin Woo water and began mining with the equipment that was there all along. Jin Woo noticed how weird he was acting, but he assumed it was because he was the savior of Jin Ho's life in his perspective. The lizards chose that moment to blast into the room. They were surprised by the current state of the dungeon. Those guys are still alive. And the boss is dead. They couldn't have killed it by themselves. Was that spider just big and stupid? It most definitely was the rich boy's equipment. This is going to be troublesome. We have no idea what special abilities that equipment possessed. Our best bet is to recruit that deranker. Eugene Ho, I looked you up because of that fancy equipment. Turns out you're the son of someone special. Your father's Chairman Yu Myung-han. What's it to you? I'll give you the chance to see your family again. All you have to do is kill Sung Jin-woo. Otherwise, you'll both die by our hands. The moment the offer was given, Jin-woo knew the obvious outcome. Why would Jin-ho choose the side of a loser? A weak hunter who was a liability to anyone around him. He would be betrayed again. This was nothing new. Jin-ho stepped in front of Jin-woo. Ready to put his life on the line? You're going to take his side and fight us. I really wanted to avoid killing the son of such an influential businessman. It would be such a wasteful opportunity. First, let's take out the weakling, then we will decide what to do with Jin-ho. Have either of you ever killed another human? An emergency quest has been issued. Emergency quest: kill the enemies. There are entities nearby that intend to murder the player. Slay them and ensure your safety. If this quest is not completed, a penalty will be issued as a result. Penalty: your heart will stop. Enemies required to be killed: 8. Enemies killed: 0. Jin-woo was in shock. The system was leaving him with no choice but to become a murderer. And at that moment, Jin-woo took a blast to the chest. Yujin-ho, don't worry about the dead and come over here. Jin-woo was experiencing system errors. As he lay there dying, he wondered why. Why had he forgotten that this world was survival of the fittest? Why was he worried about others? He should be focused on his survival above all else. Every time he stepped into a dungeon, he had to fight for his life. He had to push past his limits. He had almost died so many times. Nothing had changed. The system is forcing me to murder. Forcing me to kill my enemies. Kill or be killed. The system was looking out for its own needs. Jin-woo stood up, strong and resolute. The system was sending a clear message. Jin-woo needed to be strong. There was no goodwill between him and the system. The system used him. And he used the system. The lizards noticed that Jin-woo had survived. I guess you didn't hit him as hard as I thought. No. I definitely put my all into that magical attack. There's no way he survived. You played around with a person's life, so are you ready to face the consequences? What is this bastard saying? If you guys are hunters, you should be prepared to be hunted. Sir, I'll take care of him. As the fool stepped up to cut down Jin-woo, his head was cut from his body. Everyone around was shocked by the sight. No one saw it coming. The system started the count. 1. Jin-woo walked with his dagger in hand. Nothing changes the fact that I just killed someone. Even if it was an order from the system. I can't run away anymore. I have to own this. If only the strong can survive. Jin-woo had a flashback of all the death and destruction he'd witnessed over the past month. To that terrible event where all his comrades were cut down. Where he stepped up and saved their lives. If only the strong can survive. Jin-woo stepped forward like a demon possessed. His aura radiating from his body. His eyes glowed with determination. I don't know what he just did, but hit him with another blast. The mage put everything he had into his next attack. Before the attack landed, Jin-woo cut the mage down. This set the other lizards off. And 2 more of their group hit the ground. How is an E-rank moving like this? He's too fast. Effect paralysis has activated. My body isn't moving. Magic. Is it magic? That son of a. Jin Ho believed Jin Woo had become stronger than when he fought the dungeon boss. Effect bleed has activated. Effect paralysis has activated. In a flash, Jin Woo had dealt with all the lizards. Only the leader remained. Enemies required to be killed, 1. Enemies killed, 7. The leader was furious. All his members were taken down in a blink of an eye. It doesn't matter what secrets you're hiding. I'll show you that not all C-ranks are created equal. Empower! You can't break my defense by swinging a dagger with an exhausted body. You'll be destroyed the moment you hit me. Jin Woo's hand grasped the leader's face. Hwang Dong-suk, you're strong. But there's one thing you don't know. Jin Woo slams his head into the ground. I'm always leveling up ceaselessly. Wait, don't kill me. Spare me. I'll give you money. You can have all the mana crystals here and the magic crystals too. Are you asking for forgiveness from someone you tried to kill 3 times? Do you think you'll get away with this? Didn't you say? Nobody knows what happens inside of dungeons. You bastard, do you even know who my little brother is? Jin Woo finished it with the swing of the Rasaka's Fang. Jin Ho was sick from witnessing such a slaughter. The boss was defeated. The dungeon is closing, let's leave quickly. Quest reward. Emergency quest: kill the enemies. Completion conditions have all been met. Will you receive the reward? You may choose from rewards below. Reward number 1: stasis recovery. Reward number 2: experience points plus 10. Reward number 3: skill, bloodlust. Bloodlust level 1. Effect: fear, all stats minus 50%. Somewhere in the United States, an S-ranked Korean hunter woke up with tears streaming down his face. Back in Korea at the Hunters Association. Manger Yujingchul. A moment please. What is it? In this C-rank dungeon raid, 8 people were killed in action. The only survivors were a D-rank and E-rank hunter. Sir, they cleared the dungeon. The D-rank Eugene Ho's equipment was especially high class, so it's possible that a C-rank boss was defeated by him. But such a boss should not have been a threat to an organized party of 8. Don't beat around the bush and tell me. Yes, sir. The other survivor was Hunter Sung Jin Woo from that dungeon incident. We checked him over, he's most likely not awakened. Yes, I also think it's a coincidence. But one of the hunters who died was Hwang Dong-suk. The older brother of that traitor Hwang Dong-soo? In that case, we won't be able to just ignore this. Jin Woo was celebrating with a box of chicken wings. What happened? You're normally so stingy, said Jin Woo's little sister. I'm not sure if it's good or bad yet, but we'll see. Jin Woo was trying to get drunk. But thanks to a permanent buff, cure poison, he's not able to. He was given a few rewards by the system upon his death. Until recently, he had overlooked them. Great Spellcaster Candiara's Blessing. The Great Spellcaster Candiara has gifted a special buff to you. Candiara's Blessing will ensure that you will always be strong and healthy during your lifetime. Temporary effect. Will to rehabilitate. Any dismembered body part is restored. All diseases, poisons and status effects are healed. And sleeping will explosively increase regeneration ability. Jin Woo decided to test out his cure poison buff. He had the perfect item for the job. He removed the bag of Rasaka's venom from his inventory space. If it works as intended, it should remove the debuff, weaken muscles minus 35% strength. But leave the effect, Rasaka's steel scales, minus 20% physical damage taken. It's just as I thought, Jin Woo received a permanent buff without the side effects. Physical damage reduction, plus 20% was activated. Gina interrupted his experiment. Big bro, do you know anyone called Eugene Ho? Who? He's calling for you on the phone. Jin Woo arrived at a fancy cafe. Sir, over here. How did you find my number? I have a few connections in the guild. Would you like a cup of coffee? I'm fine. I didn't expect to ever meet you again. But you're my savior. Jin Woo earned 1,008,001 from selling the magic crystals Jin Ho had collected. Since you kept quiet, there's been no problems so far. Those guys tried to kill us first. With hunters, it's survival of the fittest. And Jin Woo, you were most definitely the fittest. So why did you request to meet me? I'm actually planning to create a personal attack I have to decline. But I didn't even finish my sentence. I don't need to hear it. You're creating a personal attack force and you want me to join. But I have no intentions of playing around with some rich kid. I'll be going if there's nothing else. I need you to enter just 20 times. No, please go with me just 19 times. And I'll split the cut with you properly. Are you right in the head? Even after seeing such terrifying scenes, you want to create an attack force with me? Wait, don't tell me. You want to become a guild master? Yes, sir. Please don't leave. I need to become a guild master. In order to accomplish this, I need to attend 19 more raids. Jin Woo was putting all the pieces together. So let me get this straight. You're the second son of Yu Myung-han, the chairman of Eugene Construction. And your father wants to create a guild. And you are trying to become the guild master of said guild. Dungeons are dangerous, but proportionally to that, they contain mountains of treasure. Magic crystals or mana crystals are just a few. Monster corpses are used as materials as well, so there is nothing useless in dungeons. Of course, major companies want to get involved. So the hunters that work at the companies complete the dungeon, and the company takes the rewards. So Eugene Construction is planning to become self-sufficient. That's correct, sir. My father is planning to employ an S-rank hunter and set him as the master. My brother would be the vice master and operate the guild under the guise of contributing. That wouldn't work. The power difference is too high. There's bound to be friction. Jin Woo, can you just hear me out? I will keep your secret forever regardless. If you plan to hide your abilities and raid, don't you need an attack force? Compared to raiding with a high-ranked hunter, the achievement of safely completing a raid with an E-rank hunter is much bigger. So what do I get out of joining? Said Jin Woo. This. Jin Ho passed the contract across the table. As the sun began to rise, Jin Woo set out to complete his daily quest. Much to his surprise, his little sister Gina insisted on tagging along. Although he knew she wouldn't be able to keep up, he didn't mind the company. As they began their run, Jin Woo posed a hypothetical question to Gina: what would she do with 3 billion won? She had never really thought about it before, but the question lingered in her mind as they continued on. Jin Woo picked up his pace, leaving Gina in his dust. He was lost in thought about the proposition he had received from Jin Ho. The contractable agreement was for a $3 billion one-office facility, which would serve as the starter guild headquarters. However, Jin Woo was a special case even among the reawakened. His ability to level up meant that he could potentially become incredibly powerful, and the amount of money offered was insignificant in his unique situation. Despite this, Jin Woo agreed to the deal with one condition: only he and Jin Ho would enter the dungeons. The only issue was that a group of 10 members was required to enter the dungeon. However, Jin Woo was confident that they could easily find hunters willing to do nothing for a payday. As he ran, Jin Woo lost track of how far he had gone, realizing that he had already surpassed the distance required to complete the quest. He took advantage of the extra time before Gina caught up to push the limits of the quest requirements, doubling each of the required stats. When Gina finally arrived, Jinwoo took off once again, determined to double his running distance to 20 kilometers. Meanwhile, back in America, S-rank hunter Hwang Dong-soo was seeking revenge for the murder of his brother and 7 teammates. However, thanks to his assistant's advice, he decided to wait 2 weeks before traveling to Korea. This gave Jinwoo the opportunity to become even stronger and unstoppable. Jinwoo had unlocked a hidden quest that doubled his quest objectives and was awarded the Demon Castle Key, an S-rank dungeon key. He decided to choose the Blessed Random Box, leaving behind the Cursed Random Box. When he used the Demon Castle Key at the gate's entrance, he was transported to a world of fire and brimstone. However, he knew he wouldn't be able to progress far in this S-rank dungeon and had the Hearthstone he received in his first instant dungeon on standby. S-rank dungeons were not to be taken lightly, as South Korea had only experienced one before that resulted in the loss of Jeju Island. It was left as a wasteland to humans since there was no guarantee that all of South Korea's S-rank hunters together would be able to clear the island. Jinwoo approached the gatekeeper of the dungeon, Cerberus, a 3-headed dog. He believed that if the puzzle aligned the way he thought, he might be able to defeat him. The first title Jinwoo would receive was Wolf Slayer, which could give him an advantage if Cerberus counted as a wolf along with his other abilities. When Jinwoo made his first attack, the effect of Wolf Slayer activated, allowing him to damage Cerberus from all sides. He then activated Sprint, which allowed him to keep attacking Cerberus. Jinwoo also activated his newest ability, Bloodlust, but it failed to activate due to Cerberus's high resistance. Even though the fight with Cerberus looked promising on paper, he outclassed Jinwoo significantly. The title Wolf Slayer increased Jinwoo's stats by 40%, and he still wasn't able to do substantial damage to the beast. The system warned Jinwoo that Cerberus was preparing to use the skill Wrath, which would double its stats for 3 minutes. Jinwoo rushed towards Cerberus, stabbing him in the eye, but Cerberus felt no pain. Cerberus countered Jinwoo's attack and ripped his arm from his body, causing his health to drop significantly. However, due to his skill perseverance, Jinwoo was able to reduce the damage he took by 50%. This reignited Jinwoo's fighting spirit, and he used his daily quest reward, Stasis Recovery, to recover. He then grabbed one of Cerberus's heads by the mouth and spun in a circle, cracking its neck. Jinwoo ran his dagger through the eyes of the second Cerberus and through its body, through a wall. The system alarm announced, "You have slain Hell's Gatekeeper, Cerberus." Thanks to the battle with Cerberus, Jinwoo realized his limitations and knew that if he opened the gate to the castle, he would surely die. He decided to return when he had become a bit stronger. Jinwoo received 3 items as a reward for defeating Cerberus: Warden's Necklace A-Class, a dog collar that gave agility plus 20 and sense plus 20, and the key to the front gates. He also received Cerberus's Fong, a crafting material. Meanwhile, in a back alley in South Korea, a CEO of a large business was paying a hunter for his help. The CEO had heard the phrase, "What happens in the dungeon stays in dungeons," and was offering 20 billion won for assistance. He begged the hunter to kill the hunters who had murdered his son. Since this particular hunter was a psychopath, he relished the opportunity. 2 men were practicing kendo in a traditional dojo, their movements fluid and precise. The elder one, a master swordsman, was none other than the infamous leader of the dungeon from a few months ago. His pupil, a skilled swordsman in his own right, was going easy on him because he had only one arm. But the master chastised him, insisting that he give his all in the practice. The pupil then inquired about the master's retirement, and why he had postponed it. The master replied with a philosophical statement, "Even if I live, how long will I? With my remaining life, I want to stay useful to this world." Just then, his phone rang, informing him of an emergency dungeon and summoning. He had been receiving more and more of these summonings lately. The dungeon he was summoned to was only D-ranked, but he walked down the road, surrounded by falling cherry blossoms, lost in thought about his situation. He pondered the reason why he, a swordsman, had been awakened as a mage. The sword skills he had spent a decade mastering were useless to him in the dungeon. There had to be a reason for this strange turn of events. As he walked, a familiar face caught his attention, interrupting his train of thought. The person approached him and said, "Excuse me? Are you Mr. Sung?" It was surprising, because Jin Woo looked nothing like his old self. The person remarked on his appearance and the torn state of his leg. Jin Woo replied that he wasn't sure what had happened, but when he woke up in the hospital, he was in this state. The person was relieved that he had survived and commented that it was not good for a young man like him to become disabled. They were both summoned by the guild and discovered that the other survivors from that fateful day were there as well. They stood around, reminiscing and healing old wounds. Ju Hee, in particular, was surprised by Jin Woo's current state and let him know that she had been searching for him. Their reunion was interrupted by a van full of hunter prisoners who were also participating in the raid due to a lack of hunters in the area. They were all C-ranked, and their chaperone was the B-ranked psychopath from earlier. Jin Woo realized that something was not right and asked Ju Hee to drop out of the raid. However, she insisted on going if he was going. As the group made their way through the gate, they couldn't shake the feeling that this might be another fateful day. In the depths of the dungeon, the prisoners were finally unshackled from their restraints. The group's chaperone introduced himself, and Jin Woo requested that Mr. Sung become their leader once again. Mr. Sung, however, humbly refused, acknowledging that while his mistake had led to the death of 11 people, it was thanks to Jin Woo that 6 others had survived. He respectfully bowed to Jin Woo in honor of those who had perished, and sought Mr. Kim's approval for the decision. Despite this show of unity, it seemed that not all wounds had fully healed. As the prisoners engaged in battle with the monsters, it was difficult to discern who the true monsters were. Jin Woo proved himself in the first round of combat, impressing everyone with his skills. However, upon observing Miss Ju Hee's struggles with the goblins, Jin Woo realized that she would soon have to retire from hunting. In turn, she noted the changes in him, from a once hopeless demeanor to a newfound sense of calm and confidence, remarking that he had truly become a man. As the group reached a fork in the path, the psychopathic members suggested splitting up into 3 groups. He and the criminals would take the right path, Jin Woo and Mr. Song would take the left, and the rest would head up the middle. Should anyone discover the boss's room, they were to immediately inform the others. However, Jin Woo could sense the chaperone's killing intent emanating from him, making him wary of his true intentions. Jin Woo and Mr. Song made their way down the left path, as Jin Woo hoped to encounter the boss for a larger reward of experience points. Meanwhile, the psychopathic member saw this as an opportunity to eliminate the prisoners, concocting a lie about their demise at the hands of 100 goblins. Finally, Mr. Kim, filled with remorse for abandoning Jin Woo, vowed to apologize to him once the raid was over. It seemed luck had abandoned Mr. Kim when he encountered the psychopath who had just finished off the last prisoner. Fate had brought them together, but it was not a good situation for the 2 hunters. Jin Woo and Mr. Song could sense the intense killing intent and rushed back to save their comrades. Jin Woo acted quickly to block the psychopath's first attack aimed at Miss Ju Hee. The murderer was taken aback by Jin Woo's swift and successful countermeasure. It was clear that the killer had singled out Ju Hee as her healing abilities posed a significant threat to his sinister plans. The 2 fellow hunters they had left behind had not survived, but Jin Woo noticed that Mr. Kim was still alive and ordered Ju Hee to heal him as quickly as possible. But Mr. Kim refused the healing, stating that he had already lost too much blood. In a desperate plea, Jin Woo urged him to stay alive, reminding him of his family and how he must live for them. With deep regret, Mr. Kim apologized to Jin Woo, wishing he could have done so with his head bowed. Mr. Sung Jin Woo was furious and demanded to know why the psychopath had attacked Mr. Kim. "I don't know," the chaperone said, pretending to ponder the answer. "It could have been the monsters." The killer then offered a new story to replace the old one. In this version, the criminals had broken free and attempted to escape. They killed all the hunters, but the boss was too much for them to handle, leaving only the psychopath as the sole survivor. Jin-woo was enraged by the psychopath's lies and insisted that he would make him pay. But before he could act, Mr. Song stepped forward, borrowing Mr. Kim's sword. Although he was not a melee hunter, he hoped Miss Joo-hee's buff to his physical strength would give him an advantage. The psychopath mocked Mr. Song's choice, questioning what a magician like him was doing relying on physical strength buffs. But Mr. Song ignored him and closed in for the attack. "Let's do this," he said. "I'm a swordsman." As Mr. Song faced off against the psychopathic assassin, he knew he had to tread carefully. Though Miss Joo-hee had boosted his strength to even the playing field, he couldn't risk injuring himself with the body of a mage. With a healer backing him up, he hoped to emerge victorious from this difficult battle. The psychopath launched his attack, and their swords clashed. "It's only normal for a magician to be weak against an assassin," taunted the psychopath. "You're so weak, what's the point in you holding that weapon?" But for a moment, Mr. Song managed to keep up with the assassin's speed. If he pushed just a little harder, he could win this. The psychopath grudgingly gave Mr. Song some credit, but reminded him that there was a reason there were no magical swordsmen. As the battle wore on, the psychopath grew increasingly frustrated by Miss Joo-hee's healing abilities. He knew he couldn't let this become a battle of endurance, so he decided to take her out of the equation. He rushed towards her, leaving his back open to an attack from Mr. Song. The psychopath quickly countered the attack, surprised by Mr. Song's skill. Mr. Song revealed that despite his appearance as a frail old man, he had trained an S-rank student and his skills were as sharp as ever. Even if his body couldn't keep up, his skills would. The assassin launched a barrage of attacks on Mr. Song, determined to finish him off. "You might have won if your opponent was someone different," he sneered. "But my rank itself is superior to yours. I doubt you can even see my movements. You now see the futility in all of this." Miss Joo-hee tried to intervene with her healing, but Mr. Song waved her off. The psychopath stepped in for the killing blow. Mr. Song unleashed all his magical energy in one blast. Did it work? But the level difference between the two was just too great. A magician hiding his skills pretending to be a swordsman. To lay a trap, I'm impressed you're a sly old fox. Now die. But just as he was about to strike, Jin-woo appeared, blocking the attack. The assassin was taken aback. "You again? Who are you? What's your rank?" "I'm Sung Jin-woo," Jin-woo replied calmly. The assassin didn't believe him. "An E rank with such speed is not possible. You're not normal. You've been hiding your strength, haven't you? You're not a fake ranker. So, there's only one answer. You've been reawakened." Jin-woo's friends were shocked by this revelation, but the assassin wasn't deterred. "My experience will give me the advantage. I'll teach you a lesson as your superior," he declared. "Why did you do all this?" "You're referring to the killings," the psychopath responded. "I mean everything. That's a pretty damn scary face you got there, Jin-woo." Jin-woo listened intently as the assassin explained that he was contacted by a CEO of a large corporation whose son had been murdered by the prisoners and played with like a toy. The CEO had offered the psychopath a large sum of money to take revenge. "I don't trust you," Jin-woo replied. "You may say that, but your expression tells me that you want to teach us a lesson and show us who's superior. Am I wrong? And I have no intentions of believing someone who's a habitual liar." Out of nowhere, the psychopath attacked, and their blades sparked. "It doesn't matter if you believe me or not," he said. "It's just pitiful that all of you will die alongside those insects." "You're pitiful as well," Jin-woo retorted. "Because you will die here soon." "Jin-woo, I don't know how many ranks you've risen since you were your rank, but this won't be as easy as you think. You're too slow." The psychopath taunted Jin Woo, "Is this your fastest speed? If your body's not able to keep up, then it's pointless." Miss Juhi realized that Jin Woo was falling behind in the battle and cast haste and burn on him, giving him the advantage. The psychopath realized he had to stop playing around, or he would die that day. They traded blows back and forth, all over the dungeon, and all Mr. Song and Juhi could do was cluster together to stay out of the way. The psychopath commented that even if they had similar speeds, their difference in experience was too vast. "And that difference will lead to your defeat," sung Jin Woo. The psychopath then launched a surprise attack at Miss Juhi, but Mr. Song stepped in to block, only to be fooled by a feint. The psychopath changed his path and laid a barrage of attacks on Jin Woo. "Sorry, but could you lower your killing intent, please?" Jin Woo's system activated an emergency quest, as it was very sensitive to killing intent. Jin Woo had no choice but to put the psychopath down, as the system would not take the risk of Jin Woo being killed. With that, Jin Woo initiated the next attack, surprising the psychopath who had been holding the advantage. Jin Woo was feeling grateful for the system for the first time. It had given him another reason to bring the psychopath down. The taunts from the psychopath didn't faze him. He knew that he was the best counter to the psychopath, being an A-class with expertise in daggers and agility, a close-range damage dealer, and an assassin. However, he had learned that being a blabbermouth in battle was utterly useless. Jin Woo decided that it was time to end this. He activated his sprint ability, putting the psychopath on the defensive. The psychopath realized that Jin Woo had used the skill, and was caught off guard as Jin Woo sliced his face, activating paralysis, bleeding, vex. Jin Woo's dagger had a unique ability, but the psychopath was lucky to be an assassin type, as he was highly resistant to poison. The psychopath then disappeared, leaving Jin Woo confused. He instinctively blocked an incoming attack, impressing the psychopath. He revealed his camouflage skill, which he had kept a secret since no one had ever survived after seeing it. The psychopath cut Jin Woo's tendon, and he was too far away from Miss Juhi for a strong healing spell. Mr. Song had to buy enough time from Miss Juhi to heal Jin Woo. Neither knew that Jin Woo had the ability to heal himself. Jin Woo was ignoring the nonsense coming from his enemy's mouth. "You talk too much." Stasis recovery. Everyone was shocked by this. Jin Woo was healed instantly. He looked fresh and ready to fight. The psychopath didn't understand what was happening. There was no assassin types with the ability to recover. Jin Woo realized that relying on his daily quest reward had its limitations. He needed to think of other solutions as well. Was this a trick? Was he faking? How many times can he use that spell? The psychopath was at a loss for words. He now realized that he was in a dangerous situation. Another one of Jin Woo's emotions faded away. "Even anger itself is a waste on the likes of you," Jin Woo said. Jin Woo attacked the invisible psychopath. He realized that Jin Woo had killed before. And a smile spread across his face. "We're the same, you and I." Because Jin Woo was determined to change his destiny, he often had to make rash decisions. But some of those decisions were taken out of his hand by the system. So, he wasn't entirely the same as this psychopath. Jin Woo gained no pleasure from killing other humans. Being awakened makes you realize that the rules of society didn't apply to you. New exclusive rules for hunters were created. There was no need to be shackled by the laws of man. The psychopath recited out loud the words of the strong. "We're the only laws that matter." The psychopath was prepared to unleash his full power. He attacked Jin Woo with all he had, causing sparks to fly. He realized how Jin Woo saw through his camouflage, a split second before he landed a killing blow. His extreme killing intent was giving him away. So he had to change the flow of his attack. The system awarded Jin Woo a new skill. Killing intent was activated. The psychopath stopped in his path. He felt as if he had stepped into quicksand. What? What is this? All he could see was darkness, a shadow of ominous intent. Jin Woo's dagger plunged into his chest. Jin Woo recited Nietzsche's famous quote. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. As a hunter who has witnessed countless deaths and taken lives himself, he understood the importance of maintaining one's humanity in the face of extreme danger. But in the world of hunters, fighting against monsters wasn't the only challenge. Sometimes, they found themselves fighting amongst each other. Jin Woo recognized that hunters were perfect killing machines, unlike ordinary humans. He asked his opponent, whom he had just defeated, if he would lump hunters and regular humans into the same category. The dying man acknowledged that he was a perfect killing machine, and Jin Woo revealed that he was unsure of his own identity. He knew that being a blabbermouth was not useful, but keeping too many secrets was not great either. As the effects of the paralyze and bleed activated, Jin Woo honored his opponent's dying wish and revealed that he was a hunter who grew stronger from each fight. He questioned how strong he could become, and his opponent warned him that his shadows were connected to the darkness, and he would become as strong as his shadows, depth in the dark. Jin Woo felt that every time he got stronger, a part of himself was lost. Nonetheless, he saved Ju-hee's life again and was thanked by both her and Mr. Song. Ju-hee suggested they report to the guild, but Mr. Song recommended they close the dungeon first to avoid complicating things for Jin Woo. He wanted to give everyone a proper burial, but closing the dungeon was for the best. As they left, Jin Woo received the rune skill, Stealth, after breaking the rune. He knew that he could obtain his opponent's skill after killing him. While Mr. Song and Ju-hee went ahead to report to the guild, Jin Woo walked over to one of the prisoners, laying in a puddle of blood. "Get up! I know you're alive." Jin Woo grabbed him by the back of his jacket, dragging him towards the dungeon boss. "Mr. Ju would probably heal you if we go outside. At this rate, you'll probably die of blood loss." The prisoner thought he was saved, but then realized that Jin Woo was dragging him in the wrong direction. "Do you remember the faces of all your victims? You're trash, even beyond that psychopath. No way I'd take a monster like you outside." The prisoner looked back, shocked as the goblins grabbed him by the mouth. A silent wail was heard echoing through the dungeon. Defeating the hobgoblin wasn't too difficult a task for Jin Woo. After Mr. Song and Miss Ju-hee explained the situation to the guild employee outside the dungeon, she immediately contacted her superiors. It wasn't long before an elite arrived at the scene. Mr. Song asked how much time had passed since the dungeon was cleared and was informed that they only had 20 minutes left, which wasn't enough time to recover the victim's body. The elite then ordered everyone to be called back. When asked if the survivors cleared the dungeons themselves, the answer was affirmative. The elite couldn't believe that someone would try to kill the remaining hunters during a contracted assassination. Jin Woo was recognized by the elite, who turned out to be Woo Jin-chul, the head of the monitoring division. Jin Woo remembered him as one of the guys who tested him at the hospital. Woo Jin-chul acknowledged that one of their employees had caused him great harm and promised to officially apologize once the case was resolved. Jin Woo sensed the strength emanating from Woo Jin-chul and realized he had to be at least an A rank. He agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Woo Jin-chul then asked Jin Woo who killed the B rank Kang Tae-shik. Jin Woo realized he would have to cancel the contract he made with Jin Ho, as it would be impossible to hide that he was reawakened now. Mr. Song took responsibility, and revealed that he was the one who killed him. When asked about his rank, Mr. Song said he was a C rank. Jin-chul was skeptical about how a C rank could defeat a B rank combat assassin like Kang Tae-shik, but Mr. Song pointed to Ju-hee, the B ranked healer, who supported him. Jin Woo wondered why Mr. Song was covering for him, and whispered his question to him. Mr. Song replied that he assumed Jin Woo had enough reason to hide his abilities and that he couldn't pay him back for what he had done for him, but this was the least he could do for now. Woo Jin-chul warned Jin Woo of an imminent threat coming his way. He informed him that only he and a D rank had survived the dungeon assault where Hwang Dong-suk and his personal attack force perished. Hwang Dong-soo, the S-rank brother of Hwang Dong-suk, may be seeking revenge for the incident. Jin Woo was advised to watch out for him as even the monsters feared him. Leaving the country with his loved ones was suggested as an option. Jin-woo contemplated how strong he was and how strong he needed to become to protect his family and himself. 3 hours after the investigation of the dungeon incident, the gold businessman CEO turned himself in, justifying his actions. Jin-woo was finally on his long-awaited date with Joo-hee, and as they reminisced about their past, she couldn't help but reflect on the differences in their individual journeys. While Jin-woo reassured her that everyone progresses at their own pace, Joo-hee had come to accept that she wasn't cut out to be a hunter, as fear gripped her too easily. Despite her efforts to overcome her fears, she had to settle for joining low-ranking squads, something that she found annoying as she had to frequently deal with Jin-woo's injuries. At that moment, Joo-hee couldn't help but admire Jin-woo's resilience and tenacity. "Your eyes are always brimming with life. I don't think I'll ever be able to have such eyes," she said. Joo-hee said. "Here, I held on to this, hoping this day would come." Jin-woo realized Miss Joo-hee was going to retire. She told him that she'd be heading back to her hometown, Busan. And if he was ever in town, she would buy him some fresh sashimi. A smile spread across his face. "If I'm ever around, I'll ask you to go out with me again." Their paths split there, but hopefully one day they'll meet again. Jin-woo's mind was also preoccupied with the thought of getting stronger quickly, as it was the only way for him to survive. The next day, Jin-ho introduced him to their new teammates, who all had their hunter's licenses but couldn't attend raids due to various reasons. Jin-woo was surprised to find a young lady in a hoodie, who claimed to be a fully fledged hunter, despite being in grade school. When he asked about her raid experience, fear sparked on her face, but Jin-woo reassured her that only he and Jin-ho would be going into the dungeon. Despite the skepticism from the other team members, the deal was too good to pass up, with each of them getting 3 million won per raid just for showing up. They all signed a simple contract that stipulated they would pay back 10 times the amount if they ever talked about what happened in the dungeon. Jin-woo couldn't help but notice Jin-ho's new set of Italian armor, and he poked him in the chest, sending him flying. He urged him to take it off, but Jin-ho insisted on bringing the helm just in case. As they entered the C-rank dungeon, Jin-woo was already looking forward to the next one, which was only an hour away. Back at the White Tiger Guild headquarters, an associate explained that someone had bought all the low-level dungeons, even when they had tried to purchase one for 1,000 won. He had upped the price to 100 million won, and they countered with 200 million won. It turned out to be none other than Eugene Ho, the second son of the CEO of Eugene Construction. Upon further investigation, they realized that Jin-ho was buying the gates with the support of the company, which seemed extreme. The leader put 2 and 2 together and realized that an opportunity was at hand. They knew that there was a reawaken from the double-layer dungeons from a few months ago out there, and since the White Tiger Guild had responded to that incident, they knew about E-rank hunter Sung Jin-woo. They needed to find out more about him. "Everyone, stop what you're doing. I want to know everything about D-ranked hunter Eugene Ho and E-rank hunter Sung Jin-woo. This will be your top priority," the leader declared. The chief of the White Tiger Guild was poring over the information his workers had collected on Sung Jin-woo and Eugene Ho. According to the intel, Jin-ho's father's corporation was starting a major guild, and Jin-ho, being the second son of the CEO, was likely involved. Meanwhile, Jin-woo's background was a bit more complicated. Once known as the world's weakest hunter, he had gone through 3 major incidents in the past few months. The first was the dual dungeon incident, in which the White Tiger Guild had responded, but only 6 members survived, including Jin-woo. The second incident was when Jin-woo and Jin-ho met, and only Jin-ho and Jin-woo made it out alive, while the whole of Hwang Dong-suk's private assault team perished. In the most recent incident, a monitoring division employee went rogue and was hired by a high-paying CEO to kill the hunter prisoners participating in the raid. He was discovered during the raid and decided to cover up the evidence by killing all members of the raid team. 3 members of the original dual dungeon incident survived this latest tragedy, and the one person related to all 3 incidents was none other than Sung Jin-woo. The chief believed that Jin-woo had been reawakened and that Eugene Construction was in the process of recruiting him. The White Tiger Guild had to get there first, so the chief decided to scout Jinwoo personally. In a C-rank dungeon, a pack of werewolves were confused as their prey had seemingly disappeared. Little did they know that Jinwoo was testing out his new camouflage ability, and out of nowhere, a barrage of attacks landed on them. The camouflage ability proved to be very useful, but it consumed a ton of mana. Jinwoo's system sounded 3 alarms upon destroying the group of werewolves. His sprint ability had leveled up, and he had obtained 2 new skills, Advanced Dagger Arts and Vital Strike. Advanced Dagger Arts, dagger only, you can now use daggers more proficiently. Attacks with a dagger gain an additional 33% damage. Vital Strike, dagger only, you have learned to attack efficiently. You now deal critical damage as you attack your foe's vital areas. The last werewolf chose the perfect time to show up, and Jinwoo tested his new ability, Vital Strike. He punched 3 holes completely through the werewolf's chest. Alarm! The player has reached the required level to undergo a job quest. Accept? Decline? The chief of the White Tiger Guild's management division arrived at Jinwoo's gate, which looked like a playground to him. Jinwoo's raid members were lounging around, having a picnic, playing cards, and just hanging out. When the grade schooler in a hoodie pressed them about their presence there, she had to let them know that she was also a hunter. With that little bit of information, the chief understood what was going on, and his admiration for Jinwoo rose. He was clearing dungeons solo. As Jinwoo exited the portal, his raid members prepared to move to the next location. Jinwoo informed Jinho that tomorrow's schedule needed to be cleared. That presented a problem, as Jinho would have to cancel the scheduled raids for that day. But Jinwoo told him to wait on canceling and that he would see what he could do. As Jinwoo walked out of the gate, he was approached by the chief of the Department of Management at the White Tiger Guild. They decided to head to a nearby coffee shop, where the chief got straight to the point. They wanted to recruit Jinwoo for twice the amount that Eugene Construction had offered. Jinwoo was intrigued by the offer and asked about the worth of the White Tiger Guild's building. The chief informed him that the building was worth around 50 billion. Jinwoo then asked the chief if he had the authority to hand over such a large sum of money, to which the chief was confused. Once Jinwoo brought him up to speed, he screamed 30 billion. The chief realized that he had made a mistake by approaching Jinwoo. Before leaving, Jinwoo wanted to know how the White Tiger Guild had obtained information about him. He warned them to be careful when playing with him, and at that moment, he used his camouflage ability. The chief realized that Jinwoo was more powerful than he had thought, and explained that their research had led them to him through Jinho's gate purchases. Jinwoo apologized for being a nuisance but offered to sell them 3 dungeons for 200 million each as a token of respect. The chief accepted, even though this left them with no room for profits. As a parting gift, Jinwoo fed the chief a health potion. Jinwoo had noticed that the chief was barely standing on his feet. His fatigue was through the roof. To the chief, this was a sign of trust and meant the meeting didn't go as bad as he thought. However, the next day, the chief realized that he had been scammed by Jinwoo as there were plenty of dungeons available. He received a text message from an unknown number, which was from Sung Jinwoo himself, informing him that he would pretend they had never done background research on him. The chief realized that Jinwoo was a tough cookie to crack but was satisfied that Jinwoo had provided him with his number. With that, Jinwoo entered the job change portal, eager to find out what kind of monsters awaited him inside. Jinwoo's first opponent was a formidable knight donning a suit of armor. The knight's defense was impenetrable, and Jinwoo's attacks were rendered useless. However, Jinwoo had faced an armored snake before, so he knew how to handle such a monster. With a swift jump, Jinwoo landed on the knight's back and tore off his helmet. Jinwoo realized that these mobs were more like puppets than monsters, but if the instant dungeon was filled with them, it would pose a problem. Upon entering the instant dungeon, an alarm blared, informing Jinwoo that his potion and shop abilities were restricted, and he would not gain stasis healing upon leveling up. This meant that any damage he took would accumulate. The job change dungeon was becoming increasingly risky, and Jinwoo had no idea how long it would take to clear it. Furthermore, he had put off his daily quest for later, which meant he might have to return to the death trap of a desert he had previously visited. Before Jinwoo could worry about that, he needed to take care of the muscle-headed knights that relied solely on their defense. He put away his dagger and began pummeling the group that approached him. To his surprise, he found that he could take out the puppets by targeting the places where bones would be. The best part was that the suit of armor's loot drop rate was impressive, and Jinwoo obtained a B-class breastplate and a sack of gold. The gear didn't manifest in reality, so Jinwoo wouldn't look like a doofus wearing it. His stockpile of gold had reached almost 900,000. Just then, Jinwoo sensed an incoming attack and stabbed upwards with his dagger, narrowly avoiding a fireball. Apparently, there were assassin and mage-type puppets too, and this dungeon was throwing all his previous challenges at him. The mobs were diverse, and Jinwoo knew he would have to use all his skills to survive. Fortunately, he had evenly spaced out his skill points, with the exception of intelligence, which he had not directly put any points into. Jinwoo rested against the wall, feeling completely fatigued. He closed his eyes to recover, but as soon as he did, he plucked an arrow out of the air that was aimed at him. Of course, the archer-type puppet would show up just when he was getting some rest. After dealing with the archers, Jinwoo drank a bottle of lukewarm water from the loot drop. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He had leveled up significantly and gathered a lot of gear, and the lukewarm water had lowered his fatigue. It was time for him to move on to the next area. As Jinwoo stood in front of the boss's door, he realized he had leveled up tremendously. However, he had no idea what awaited him inside. As he pushed the door open, he felt a shiver run down his spine from the presence inside. There was a throne with no king sitting upon it, and a strong energy emanated from a blood-red suit of armor, reminiscent of the dual dungeon. As the crimson armor advanced towards Jinwoo, his name glowed in a dark red hue. Blood-red Commander Igris. The knight moved closer, dragging his sword behind him, the very weapon that had protected an empty throne. Jinwoo managed to dodge Igris's first attack as the swing sliced through the pillars behind him. Despite his best efforts, Jinwoo found himself unable to land a single scratch on the imposing armor, and the battle soon began to turn against him. Realizing that he was at a severe disadvantage, Jinwoo had no choice but to switch up his tactics. Although he didn't believe he could win without a weapon, he knew he had to try. Jinwoo unequipped his dagger and prepared to fight barehanded. His opponent, Igris, seemed taken aback by this unexpected move, and to Jinwoo's surprise, he too dropped his sword and hidden daggers, displaying an unexpected sense of chivalry. However, Jinwoo felt upset that his enemy wasn't taking him seriously. He charged forward, intent on showing Igris his true power, but was quickly grabbed by his hoodie and flung against the wall. Igris immediately followed up with a brutal jab to Jinwoo's chest, which he managed to block, but not without receiving around 500 damage. He would have died if not for his new armor. Fighting an enemy who was still a problem even without weapons, Jinwoo struggled to find a way to defeat him. As a last resort, Jinwoo activated Sprint, hoping that his speed would give him an edge. However, Igris proved to be a match even for his top speed, and the two continued to exchange blows. Jinwoo took a direct hit from Igris, dropping his health below 30%, and was forced to activate Perseverance. He couldn't give up now. Determined to keep fighting, Jinwoo kicked Igris in the side of the head, causing the armor to grab him by the leg and throw him towards the throne. In that split second, Jinwoo saw an opening in Igris's defenses. With his strength nearly spent, Jinwoo slumped upon the throne, but he knew he had found a weak spot in his formidable opponent. Igris raised his hand, and in a swift motion, his sword flew towards him as he aimed to chop off Jinwoo's head. However, Jinwoo was quick to respond, utilizing the additional effect of his gauntlets to barehand stop the blow. With a quick reflex, he recalled his dagger and plunged it into Igris's eye, letting out a battle cry as he did so. "I haven't lost yet!" he exclaimed. As Igris pulled the dagger from his eye, Jinwoo wrapped his arms around Igris's waist, slamming him into a nearby wall. He was determined not to let anyone steal what was rightfully his, and once again recalled his dagger. Stabbing Igris in the crack of his faceplate, Jinwoo continued to shout, "Vital strike!" as he forced the dagger in as deep as it would go. The system alarm blared loudly, announcing the victorious end of the battle. "You have slain Blood Red Commander Igris!" And as a reward for his efforts, Jinwoo leveled up twice. Despite his success, he knew that luck had played a big part in his win, for Igris was a formidable opponent who was superior to him in every way. But as they say, fortune favors the bold, and Jinwoo's bravery had paid off. He was rewarded with top-tier loot, including an abundance of gold that exceeded all his previous collection. On top of that, he received the coveted Red Knight's helmet, an S-ranked equipment piece that boasted an incredible 20 stat points on vitality and strength. It also gave him 15% more damage reduction. But the surprises didn't stop there. Jinwoo also received the valuable runestone Dementor's Touch, which would allow him to learn a new skill by crushing it. And then there was the final item, a Hearthstone, which left him puzzled. Why would he receive such a seemingly insignificant reward after defeating such a formidable foe? Could it be that this quest was not yet over? As Jinwoo stood before Igris, he couldn't help but wonder why he was given a Hearthstone. The chaos portals that suddenly appeared around the throne room only added to his confusion. Jinwoo knew that there was more to this trial than meets the eye. He soon learned that this was the beginning of the job change quest, and the longer he lasted, the more points he could collect to place him in a higher-tier job. Jinwoo knew that time was of the essence, and he needed to plan a strategy that would allow him to last as long as possible. As the armor suits began to exit the portals, he realized that he was thankful they weren't on Igris's level, which meant he may be able to buy some time with this group of mobs. Jinwoo started the job quest off with camouflage, which he knew would give him at least 3 minutes to prepare. However, things didn't go as planned when a magician cast the detect spell on the room, causing all the knights to turn towards him. With his last mana, Jinwoo cast Bloodlust, hoping to deal as much damage as he could within the 1-minute window he had. Despite his efforts, the knights continued to pour out of the portals faster than he could kill them, leaving him with few options moving forward. As they surrounded him, Jinwoo contemplated using the Hearthstone, knowing that it would mean quitting the quest after only 5 minutes. However, he refused to give up that easily. Jinwoo remembered the taunts from his past and the sadness of being weak. He refused to let that define him any longer. As he charged towards the knights, he could hear the voices in his head, calling him the world's weakest and urging him to rest. But he didn't let that stop him. Suddenly, Jinwoo found himself in a dark space, surrounded by his failures. He could hear his former self asking why he always chose to dance with death and move away from the safe road. Jinwoo's past self couldn't help but marvel at the sight of his present self. "Whoa, is this really me?" he said, sounding both surprised and a little manic. "I can't believe that we're the same person. You're taller, gained a lot of muscle, and look sharper. You look quite strong as well. But the only thing that's changed is your appearance. You're still a weakling. I see no difference between you and me. You've gotten yourself in a situation where you're in front of death once more," his past self taunted. Jinwoo fought with all his might, taking down the knights one by one. His past self reminded him that he was only an E-rank hunter, but he refused to give up. "In the end, that's all you are. If you don't know how to control yourself, your courage becomes recklessness," his past self warned. Jinwoo gritted his teeth and punched another knight. The battle was fierce, but he was determined to come out on top. However, one knight finally managed to pin him to the ground. Jinwoo's former self began to taunt him manically, reminding him of the sacrifices and difficult choices he would have to make to become stronger. Jin Woo realized that these were the same thoughts he had experienced during his time in the dual dungeon, but for some reason, he couldn't recall it clearly. Suddenly, an alarm went off, notifying Jin Woo that he had failed his daily quests for the day. He knew that failing to complete the daily quest would bring punishment associated with the quest. As the time ticked down, Jin Woo's past self managed to slip in a few more words. "Luck is also a skill," he said, "and leaving you here to die would be a waste. I'll see you around, Jin Woo." Just as he lay there defenseless, a sword fell towards his head. Jin Woo found himself being moved to the penalty zone, with an orange sun rising in the endless desert that surrounded him. He quickly realized that his HP was dangerously low, and his fatigue was almost full. As he pondered the start of his job quests, he knew that something was off when the system wished him good luck. He couldn't shake off the feeling that the system was anything but encouraging. With 4 hours to prepare for his return to the throne room, Jin Woo decided to purchase the most expensive potion from his store, hoping that it would help restore his health. However, it wasn't enough, and his HP remained alarmingly low. He realized that he needed to level up in this place to have any chance of survival. Despite being one hit away from death, Jin Woo felt a strange sense of euphoria. The giant centipedes appeared just in time, and he began to fight with renewed vigor. If he could endure the pain, he knew that it would only make him stronger. Jin Woo's little sister awoke from a restless dream and immediately became worried when she realized her brother hadn't made it home yet. It was already past 3 a.m., and she knew that her parent-teacher conference was scheduled for that day. She anxiously wondered if her brother had forgotten about it. Meanwhile, Jin Woo had been stuck in the penalty zone for what felt like an eternity. Despite being there for several hours, he managed to level up a few times, which greatly improved his health. He was determined to finish the job quest in the throne room, but time was running out. With only 3 minutes left before the penalty quest ended, he decided to purchase an upgraded weapon that could pierce the knight's armor. The only problem was that the weapon, the Night Killer, was incredibly expensive, costing a whopping 2.8 million gold. Jin Woo hesitated but knew that he needed every advantage he could get. Using bandages from his store, Jin Woo tied the new dagger to his hand, determined not to let it slip away like the Hearthstone did. He also decided to use the Dementor's Touch rune he obtained earlier from killing Igris. The skill allowed him to control objects without touching them, just like Igris did with his sword. However, Jin Woo's proficiency was too low to control larger objects, so he had to be careful. As the clock ticked down, Jin Woo's heart pounded in his chest as he braced himself for what lay ahead. When the penalty quest ended, he was immediately swarmed by a horde of knights, and he knew he had to act quickly. With his new dagger in hand, he took down the first knight with ease. But something felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't leveling up as he should be. Upon scanning the room, Jin Woo noticed that the magicians had been casting spells the entire time but had never attacked him directly. He pondered what kind of spells they were casting, ruling out debuffs, curses, healing, or buffing. Suddenly it dawned on him the magicians were summoners. He realized that no matter how many knights he took down, a new one would appear. It was only then that he understood that the magicians were controlling them. Without hesitation, Jin Woo threw his dagger towards the closest magician, and all the knights that the magician had been controlling fell to the ground. He had learned a new skill, dagger throw, which proved useful in this battle. However, the fight was far from over, and Jin Woo knew he had to find and defeat all the magicians. He activated his stealth ability, using camouflage to blend in with his surroundings. But the magicians were no fools. They cast detect spells, pinpointing his location. As Jin Woo advanced through the penalty room, his sharp senses honed in on the locations of the 5 magicians. With a swift move of his hand, he used the Dementor's Touch to pull his dagger towards him. The first magician was caught off guard and Jin Woo sliced it to bits. 4 more to go. The remaining magicians put their knights between themselves and Jin Woo, but he was undeterred. Jin Woo punched and sliced his way through the crowd, determined to eliminate every last one of them. One of the knights saw an opening and took the opportunity to stab Jinwoo in the back. Enraged, Jinwoo used Dementor's touch to crush the magician's throat, leaving only 3 opponents left. The magicians banded together and cast a spell that brought the numerous corpses in the room to life, creating a massive golem. Jinwoo didn't flinch and climbed the golem's back, pummeling it until it became unstable. He seized the opportunity and swiftly cut down the remaining magicians, taking advantage of their close proximity from the summoning of the golem. The timer showed 4 hours, 29 minutes, and 16 seconds. The time he spent inside the penalty room had been added to the clock. All monsters in the room have been slain. The quest will end now. You will be able to choose a class based on the amount of points you have collected. Jinwoo had his sights set on the assassin class, as it aligned with his acquired skills. The job will be granted after analyzing the player's actions. Jinwoo was surprised when the system said, "Granted." He wouldn't be given the chance to choose, but he guessed that his stats aligned with warrior, assassin, or paladin classes. Regardless of which one was chosen, he would be stronger regardless. Wherever the player goes, the reaper follows. The player's path is littered with corpses and the smell of blood. As the player possesses strength, he relies on himself and overcomes every obstacle without assistance from others. Jinwoo was puzzled by what the system was insinuating. Your desire for strength burns so brightly that it calls forth those who wander in the valley of death, and the army of the dead who follow your commands shall blaze a trail wherever you go, your will the only law and your power unmatched. An army of the dead? What was this? It couldn't possibly be his job. Jinwoo was bewildered when he received the job of a necromancer. He had never invested in intelligence, and he always saw himself as a combat-focused hunter. Necromancers, on the other hand, were known for their ability to summon minions to fight on their behalf. Despite his misgivings, Jinwoo weighed the advantages of the job and realized that he could build his own army. However, he hesitated when the system asked him to accept the job, but after some consideration, he decided to take the offer. Jinwoo knew that the top hunters in the world possessed unique abilities. Some were powerful healers, while others could create impenetrable shields. Rumors swirled about the White Tiger Guild's leader's ability to transform into a monster. Necromancers were a hidden class, and Jinwoo wondered if it had its own unique skill. After some contemplation, Jinwoo decided that being a necromancer was similar to creating his own guild. He reasoned that his minions would grow stronger as he did. Based on the amount of points you obtain, you will be given the chance to be promoted to a superior class. You have exceeded the expected playtime. Points will be added. You did not use your Hearthstone. Points will be added. Your final health is above 50%. Points will be added. All enemies have been slain. Points will be added. The total points have exceeded the feat limit. You will be promoted from Necromancer to Shadow Sovereign. Jinwoo was in shock that he had been promoted. A promotion was like a warrior becoming a berserker or a knight becoming a sword master. You have learned a job-exclusive skill. You have obtained bonus stats. You have obtained the title, the one who overcomes adversity. Jinwoo was now a Shadow Sovereign. If Jinwoo had not gone to the penalty zone and obtained so many extra points, he would still be just a necromancer. Jinwoo heard screams of agony coming from the throne room, and he knew it was time to put his new abilities to the test. He could use the Shadow Extraction skill to turn corpses into summonable beings. Jinwoo decided to create his own army and used the command phrase, "Arise!" And with that, the shadows of the dead knights pulled themselves into this realm. Jinwoo was pleased with his creations, which consisted of 27 infantrymen and 3 magicians of varying ranks. As Jinwoo surveyed his army, he realized that he could extract the shadow of an A or S-ranked hunter. He had already obtained 2 shadows of A-rank equivalent. Jinwoo's attention turned to Commander Igris's corpse, lying in the corner. He knew he had to sacrifice one of his weakest soldiers to summon Igris. Jinwoo felt a twinge of sadness as he sent the being to the nothingness. "Arise!" Jinwoo flinched at the shadows that were forced outwards as he failed to extract Igris. You still have 2 chances remaining. The extraction rate is based on the target stats and the time since death. Igris being a boss and over 4 hours had passed since his death meant he was going to be a challenge to extract. Jinwoo tried it again, putting all the energy he had into it. And for the second time, he failed to extract Igris. You still have 1 chance remaining. Jinwoo then realized what the problem was, and asked Igris to stop protecting the seat of someone who had already left, and instead protect him. Arise. And with that, Igris accepted Jinwoo as his master. Jinwoo decided to name him simply Igris, as the blood-red stuff was just too edgy, and was thrilled to have him on his team. Igris was level 7, and Jinwoo was able to name him because he was higher than the rank of a knight. He asked Igris to take good care of him, and Igris stepped forward to take his position at the head of Jinwoo's new army. Emerging from the job quest dungeon into the bright morning light, Jinwoo couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Almost 24 hours had passed since he entered the instant dungeon, and his body was craving rest. But his respite was short-lived. His sister's call woke him up a few hours later, reminding him of the parent-teacher conference he promised to attend. Jinwoo knew he couldn't show up in his usual hoodie and tracksuit combo. He had to look presentable, so he headed to the bank to set up a new account with the money he earned from the raids he did with his friend, Jin-ho. Dressed to impress, Jinwoo met his little sister at her school, where he became the center of attention. Everyone was taken aback by his striking appearance, and wondered who he was. But it was Jin-ho's teacher who had the pleasure of meeting him. She had never met Jinwoo before but was pleasantly surprised by his charming demeanor. She praised Jin-ho's academic performance, which made Jinwoo proud. Jinwoo was taken aback when Jin-ho's teacher asked him for help with a student who had recently obtained hunter abilities but stopped attending school. The teacher informed him that the student was a friend of Jin-ho and hoped that Jinwoo could convince her to at least graduate. When he heard her name, Jinwoo knew exactly who she was. It had to be Hoodie Girl from his personal attack force. Without hesitation, Jinwoo set out to meet with the student hunter. She was shocked when he showed up in front of her place, and he could sense her unease. But Jinwoo reassured her that he was there to help. Jinwoo felt awkward standing next to her, as he replayed their previous conversations in his mind. She was taken aback upon realizing that he was the hunter her teacher had spoken so highly of. Jinwoo had asked if she knew Jin-ho, but she didn't seem interested in small talk. He proceeded to warn her about the harsh realities of being a hunter, but she was determined not to give up on her dreams. Jinwoo wasn't there to discourage her, however. He was there to help her become a great hunter. Meanwhile, the S-rank hunter Hwang Dong-soo had arrived in South Korea to take care of some business with Sung Jinwoo. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by Woo Jin-chul, the head of the monitoring division, who inquired about the duration of his stay. Hwang Dong-soo made it clear that he was only there briefly and had plans to return to America after wrapping up his business. Jin-chul then asked if his business involved Sung Jinwoo and Jin-ho, knowing fully well that they were his targets. The tension between them escalated when Hwang Dong-soo asked if Jin-chul planned on stopping him. However, Jin-chul was grateful to Jinwoo for solving a problem that they had been unable to fix due to politics. Hwang Dong-soo's brother had been murdering hunters with his personal assault force, and they couldn't intervene because of his brother's fame. Jin-chul knew that the two brothers were equally ruthless, and he despised them both. Sung Jinwoo had requested a favor from the White Tiger Guild. He wanted to take his new charge, along with the White Tigers, to observe their new recruits' training session. However, the A-rank tank recruit, Kim Chul, was not pleased about having 2 E-ranked hunters accompany them. Jinwoo knew that dungeons were not to be taken lightly, but he needed his charge to realize that as an E-ranked hunter, she would be of little use inside. Despite his concerns, the White Tiger Guild had sent a group consisting of 1 A rank, 7 B ranks, and 4 C ranks to a C rank gate. Jinwoo hoped that his plan wouldn't be affected by such an overpowered raid group. The guild's associate suggested that he watch from the sidelines as the gate would likely be too easy for him to participate. However, as Jinwoo stepped through the gate, he realized that everything had gone horribly wrong. This was a red gate, and they were all in danger. He quickly tried to warn them and screamed for them to call the main attack force. But it was too late. The gate had already sucked him in and sealed itself off. The chief realized that the main attack force couldn't solve this problem, and quickly called the master of the White Tiger Guild to inform him of the situation. Baek Yun-ho, the S-rank hunter and leader of the guild, was shocked to hear that a C-rank gate had turned into a red gate. He knew he had to come and check it out himself. The master of the monitoring division was tasked with escorting the trader around South Korea, a land scarred by a tumultuous past. As they journeyed together, the master shared his regret with the trader that they were unable to retrieve his brother's remains from the dungeon, but offered to take him to the mortuary where his brother's service took place. However, Hwang Dong-soo was resolute in his response, telling the master that he wasn't interested in the dead. He was only here to take care of his brother's scraps. Jin-chul was curious about how Hwang Dong-soo planned to accomplish that. Hwang Dong-soo replied that he shouldn't have a problem finding a loser hunter in a dungeon, given that's where they all hang out. Jin-chul pointed out the countless number of gates in Korea, and asked how he planned on finding them. Hwang Dong-soo was unfazed, confidently revealing his secret weapon, a mobile phone. Within seconds he discovered that Jin-woo had just entered a dungeon. "Whether I'd bury him or not is none of your business, Woo Jin-chul," Hwang Dong-soo declared in a cold, menacing tone. Meanwhile, the White Tiger recruits found themselves in a giant forest covered in snow. The gate they had entered through had disappeared behind them, leaving them stranded. Jin-woo was on high alert, but he didn't sense anything suspicious other than the fact that they were now trapped in this world. Suddenly, an ice arrow came flying towards Hoodie Girl, but Jin-woo was quick to grab it before it could do any harm. The group soon found themselves under attack by ice elves, creatures feared by many hunters. However, Jin-woo knew that the real name for these creatures was Hyaki, and that only those who had faced them in battle truly knew their terrifying power. The leader of the White Tiger Guild was highly displeased with the situation. As he stood in front of the gate, he could sense that it was at least a B rank, but most likely an A rank dungeon. How could something like this happen? He demanded to know the levels of the recruits inside, and was informed that there were 12 in total. The A rank Captain Kim Chul, 7 B ranks, and 4 C ranks. This was not good news. If the dungeon was weak enough, only the A rank and a few B ranks might make it out alive. The chief then shared some potentially game-changing news with the leader. There were 2 other individuals inside the dungeon, one of whom he was trying to recruit. The leader's spirits were immediately lifted, for if his second chief was trying to recruit someone personally, they must be truly special. He eagerly asked about the level of this individual, but was shocked to hear that he was only an E-rank hunter. Jin-woo realized that the Hyaki had just tried to kill the 2 weakest hunters, and that if this had happened 2 months ago, he too would have been targeted. He knew that he had to take matters into his own hands and defeat the Hyaki himself. Kim Chul stepped forward to inform everyone of their predicament. They were inside a red gate, which meant they couldn't return until either they all died, or the dungeon reopened. Hoodie Girl was understandably confused and worried, prompting Jin-woo to explain further. "A red gate connects us to another world. Once you step foot inside, no one can leave until the dungeon boss is killed or the dungeon opens on its own. In other words, we're stranded." The A-rank hunter, Kim Chul, reintroduced himself. "I'm Kim Chul, and I'll take responsibility for your survival now that we know this is a red gate," he said. But Jin-woo sensed that Kim Chul had no intention of looking out for the weaker hunters. He seemed only interested in selecting the cream of the crop and leaving the rest to perish. Predictably, the group rejected the C-rank hunters who stepped forward to join. However, one of the B-rank hunters had been watching Jin-woo and noticed that he wasn't in E-rank. Realizing her chances of survival would improve if she teamed up with him, she switched sides. With one member down, the cocky Kim Chul opened his group to one of the C-ranks he had previously rejected. Meanwhile, outside the gate, the second chief informed their leader that Jin-woo had been reawakened and was being recruited. Although he wasn't entirely certain, he trusted Kim Chul's decision. The chief of the first department of management for the White Tiger Guild, Ju Sung-chan, stepped forward and vouched for Kim Chul's abilities. The leader was grateful to have someone he could trust. But the first chief used this as an opportunity to criticize Jinwoo. The second chief defended him, saying they would see who was right when they got out. As they traveled deeper into the dungeon, Jinwoo asked the B-rank hunter why the group was so calm. She explained that they had been taught to expect the unexpected and that Kim Chul had received special coaching. He was destined to join the main group of the White Tigers. The higher-level recruits followed the path while Jinwoo's group went in the opposite direction. The B-rank hunter who had switched to Jinwoo's side kept pestering him about his rank, but he kept it to himself. Kim Chul noticed ice bear marks on a tree and speculated that the entire group that had disregarded his advice was probably dead. They should have stayed put, as the forest was ice bear territory. As he commanded his group to prepare for battle, Kim Chul paused, wondering why he assumed Jinwoo was their leader. He dismissed the thought, and vowed to kill the boss and exit the dungeon within 3 months. Outside the dungeon, Hwang Dong-soo was frustrated that he had come all the way to Korea and wouldn't even catch a glimpse of Sung Jinwoo's face. The White Tiger Guild leader couldn't comprehend why everyone was so obsessed with Jinwoo. Kim Chul's group had just fought off a group of ice bears when he ordered his men to skin and collect their meat. It would help them survive for a few days, and he was feeling quite pleased with himself. As he gloated about their success, he assumed that the other group was most likely dead by now. Meanwhile, Jinwoo's group was warned by a B-rank hunter about the dangerous ice bear markings in the area. Despite the warning, Jinwoo ventured deeper into the forest. The B-rank hunter grew increasingly worried and yelled at Jinwoo, but he assured her that the ice bears were their only concern in this territory. Hoodie Girl was intrigued by Jinwoo's confidence and wanted to know more about him, but he made it clear that he wouldn't entertain any questions from his group. Jinwoo realized that the others might be cold, so he bought winter gear for them from his store. They were all shocked that he could summon so many items at once. An ice bear suddenly appeared, and the group panicked, but Jinwoo revealed that he would be the one hunting these monsters alone. With his title, "The One Who Overcomes Adversity," activated, Jinwoo destroyed the bear with a single punch. Outside the gate, the trader couldn't wait around anymore to see what was inside the rare red gate. The leader of the monitoring guild realized how lucky Jinwoo was to survive such danger. The group sat around their encampment, eating bear meat while discussing their good fortune. The sightings of the ice bears had reduced, and they knew that their captain was out there taking care of them. Hoodie Girl was curious about Jinwoo's sister, Jina, and asked if the rumors about her hanging dictionaries on her wall were true. Jinwoo explained that she was just a normal girl who loved to sleep in and eat fried chicken. After eating, Jinwoo went out to exercise and complete his daily quest to avoid getting sent to a penalty zone. He went on his daily bear hunt, but he wasn't alone. His army of shadows was just as deadly, and he ordered them to attack. "You guys know what your mission is. So go," he commanded.